Hello, and thank you for tuning in. My name's Natalie Weithauser, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University at Bournemouth University. And today I'll be talking about Amy Winehouse and the hologram tour that wasn't. As with all conference papers, the usual caveat applies. This is very much a work in progress in the very, very early stages. So any comments, feedback, or thoughts are very much appreciated. So, after the announcement of the Amy Winehouse hologram tour in October 2018, the producers announced a delay in production in February 2019 due to the, quote, unique challenges and sensitivities of this particular case. In addition to the Winehouse hologram, the tour would have featured dancers and a live band. Originally scheduled to kick off in 2019 and planned to run for several years, a portion of the proceeds were meant to go to the Amy Winehouse Foundation that works to prevent the effects of drug and alcohol misuse on young people. Following criticism of the project, Winehouse's father insisted that it was quote, a chance to see the real Amy, unquote. So this poses the question, what or who is the real Amy Winehouse, and can it be seen, or can she be seen after the death in 2011? Winehouse's death as her life turned into a media spectacle that partly focused on her artistic legacy, but perhaps more so on her private life, including her relationships and public drug addiction. After her death, an album with previously unreleased songs was released, and this was soon followed by the 2015 documentary Amy. The hologram tour then, in some ways, is only a logical next step in the commodification and exploitation of dead celebrities, such as Amy Winehouse. Hologram tours have become a popular live music experience that is attractive to audiences for a variety of reasons, for example, nostalgia facts from their youth. As an artificial digital product, John Bennett and Cross argue that in order for the audience to accept the hologram as a legitimate presence upon the stage, it must appear to be as authentic as a corporeal musician that inhabits the stage, unquote. However, this authenticity or similarity also poses questions of exploitation. The illusion of sameness challenges notions of artistic integrity. As Arnold argues in her analysis of the Tupac Shakur hologram performance at Coachella in 2012, the difference is not only the difference here is not just academic. Tupac Shakur, as a current creative artist, is distinctively different from a dead, inactive artist, and his work can thus be circulated differently, unquote. The hologram of dead performers not only make us then reconsider ideas of artistic death and authorship, but pose questions around the commodification of embodiment, consent, and artistry. So when it comes to the hologram tours of dead artists, consent is obviously a tricky issue. ABBA, for example, who are planning a hologram tour for 2020, are still alive and can consent to and profit from their hologram tour, and may be able to give artistic input or voice their displeasure if they feel misrepresented. Dead artists obviously cannot do this. So in this paper, I argue that due to the particular form of post-feminist femininity Winehouse embodied and the ways in which she was treated as a commodity in the music industry and the media more generally as well, and her resistance to this commodification, the hologram tour poses significant ethical challenges that deserve further critical attention. I argue that loose or rigorized theory of female commodification is a useful way to make sense of Winehouse's commodification as a woman in the music industry, both when she was alive and after her death. So Irigaray contends that women exist as commodities to be exchanged between men and thus are perceived to exist only in relation to men as wives, sisters, and daughters. The process of commodification is inherently alienating, as women cannot be thought of or think of themselves as outside of these relations. But popular music can also function as a space where the commodity talks back. Rehab, Winehouse's signature song, is such an example, although its origin story indicates the opposite. Mark Ronson, the producer of the song and the album Back to Black, describes the origin of the song on an episode of BBC DJ Zane Lowe's Radio 1's Stories in July 2011. So he says, I was walking down the street with Amy. We were in New York and we'd been working together for about a week, and we were walking to some store. She wanted to buy a present for her boyfriend, and she was telling me about a specific time in her life that was, I feel bad like talking about a friend like this, but I think I've told this story enough times. But she hit like a certain low, and her dad came over to try and talk some sense into her. And she was like, he tried to make me go to rehab, and I was like, no, no, no. And the first thing I was like, ding, 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 ding. Like, I mean, I'm supposed to be like, how was that for you? And all I'm like is, we've got to go back to the studio. So while the self-reflective retelling in large parts gives an account of the personal and creative relationship between Winehouse and Ronson, it also reveals a deeply efficient and profit-oriented approach to Winehouse as a cash cow. Ronson clearly immediately recognizes the artistic potential of her spontaneous outburst, but the ding 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 is so reminiscent of the sound of a cash register that it automatically adds a layer of business-like determination to the exchange between two supposed friends or artistic partners. Irigaray describes women as commodities as, quote, subject to a schism that divides them into categories of usefulness and exchange value, unquote, that have private and social use. So here in this case, Winehouse's use value is her voice, and her exchange value is constituted by her songwriting and vocal abilities that are led back to the studio to be turned into a sellable unit like a song. The lines between private use and social use, social in the sense that Ronson works with, profits from, and makes profit for their record company, and in return the record company needs his artistic talent as a producer, become blurred in this scenario as the private friendship between Winehouse and Ronson becomes the catalyst for Winehouse's artistic social use. This blurring almost manages to hide the alienation from the female self in this process that Irigaray describes as follows. She says, quote, that it have no more body, matter, nature, that it is to be objectivization, a crystallization as a visible object of man's activity, unquote. The matter of the song, Winehouse's struggle with alcoholism, becomes secondary at this moment in their relationship, and her commodity becomes the primary focus. In this situation, to some extent, Winehouse is alienated from herself as a complex being for the sake of becoming that object of man's activity. Her drug and alcohol consumption obviously garnered much media attention during the promotional phase of the album and after. In 2007, however, her record company decided it was time for rehab, stressing her well-being as their highest priority. However, one cannot help but speculate about the financial interests the record company may have had to get her back on track and on stage. As Esther Adley for The Guardian points out, quote, it is not easy to be the country's most in-demand performer while drunk, unquote. So Winehouse is an erratic drunk woman who missed concerts of or left the stage after a couple of songs, became a liability for her record company. Refunds for cancelled concerts cost money, they do not generate it. So thus, a more cynical reading of the situation might suggest that Winehouse's status as a profitable commodity might have been at stake here, with Back to Black being the UK's second best-selling album of the 21st century. Getting Winehouse into rehab could also have been a way of maintaining her status as commodity, as only a healthy Winehouse would have been physically able to record and perform new songs. But Winehouse herself had other plans, as she stated. So she said, when asked about the situation, I asked my dad if he thought I needed to go. He said no, but I should give it a try. So I did for just 15 minutes. I went in and said hello and explained that I drink because I'm in love and have fucked up the relationship. Then I walked out. Of course, without going into the detailed analysis, I heard rehab was manifested in music, and here's a screenshot from a scene from the music video where she argues with a therapist that we cannot see about about the lack of need to actually go to rehab. So her vocal refusal to get into treatment for her addictions is therefore also a refusal to play the game of economic exchange, and a refusal to be nothing but a passive commodity. In summary, then, Winehouse was an inherently unruly commodity. Her hologram tour then raises several ethical issues. There's the question, of course, of how to portray a body that, for the most part of her career, was marked by eating disorders and drug use. and so were her performances. Infamous for incoherent, quickly aborted gigs, particularly towards the end of her life, she was a liability for a management record company and anyone who booked her. The Guardian described her last performance at the Tuborg Festival in Belgrade on 18th of June 2011 as, quote, the chaotic set during which she slurred lyrics and forgot the names of her band members led to the cancellation of her European tour. So a hologram obviously poses the same level of risk as Alan Hughes argues. Quote, the appeal of the hologram performer to an agent, manager, promoter, or venue is obvious. The case that a hologram will not exhibit or tantrum or emotional meltdown and threaten to storm off stage. A hologram will make no demands for a difficult-to-source rider for the dressing room. Equally pragmatically, there's no possibility of fatigue or burnout with a hologram performer. An onerous touring schedule will not cause any decline in quality of performance of the stage hologram, which remains as consistently pristine at every evening's curtains up as it was on the opening night. So thus then the contrast between Winehouse as a real living being with a complex life and the hologram that can perform endlessly couldn't be starker. As GQ magazine stated after the announcement of their hologram tour delay, unlike Winehouse, who appeared to dislike touring, this digital spectre will be controlled and compliant. Recordings of the voice may belong to the original singer, but the physicality of the performance will be wholly manufactured. This contrast questions her father's assertion that the hologram tour would present the real Amy. While undoubtedly a powerful and skilled performer when healthy, as she died so young, the more disastrous performances perhaps dominate her image nowadays. And as such, the hologram tour perhaps would signify a sort of rewriting of the memory of Winehouse and the sort of the performance reality of Amy Winehouse. But obviously she can't consent or give input on this situation. So in this context, Arnold argues in her analysis again of the Tupac hologram, these types of performances should be considered a different kind of violation of copyright, because as I'd like to suggest here, it is one that is implicitly violent, not just because of the Frankenstein-like elements inherent in the notion of reanimating long dead flesh, but because forcing the reanimated body in question to sing, dance, and say the words of someone else, or in a different context, has overtones of puppetry, minstrelsy, and voodoo, activities that have artistic and historical links to slavery. So here she clearly brings out the racialized aspects of hologram performances and how different modes of embodiment or artistic embodiment when alive impact the reception and significance of digital embodiments after the subject's death. Shakur's hologram must be seen in the context of the history of American slavery here, which makes this type of digital construct of a black man potentially inherently problematic. And I would argue that Winehouse's hologram would pose similar problems, albeit in a more gendered way. So this becomes particularly evident in the casting process for the body double needed to create a hologram. So an actress who auditioned for what she thought was a Winehouse biopic, but was actually the casting for the body double, described her experience as the auditioning process as follows, quote, 2 months later in LA, having already made it through the first round of auditions, at which no lines were read, her weight and her height were noted, and photographs of her face were taken from every angle, and she received an email from Fields, the producer, detailing what she would prepare for round 2. So in itself, I think it's deeply problematic that an actor's measurements and photographs were taken without informing her what they would be used for. And in addition, the scanning of the female body as part of the hologram production process reproduces some of the post-feminist surveillance mechanisms experienced by female pop stars, and Amy Winehouse in particular, this intense focus on the female body and performances of femininity. During her lifetime, she was subjected to intense scrutiny, particularly with regards to what she did with her body and what that did to her appearance. Her alcohol and drug consumption and her volatile love life left visible marks on her body in the form of scars, bloody wounds. I'm not showing the pictures because I find that ethically perhaps challenging, and drastic weight loss, which did not remain unnoticed by the tabloids and entertainment media. Her refusal to conform to expectations of appropriate post-feminist femininity arguably made her the poster girl of post-feminist disorders. Angela McRobbie defines post-feminist disorders such as binge drinking, drug addiction, and eating orders as the expression of quote ineligible rage, unquote, and has become a symptom of or reaction to post-feminist pressures which require women to be both successful in the workplace and visually appealing at all times, and often also mothers, obviously, in addition. The constant effort it takes to embody these ideals produces female subjects whose self-harming practices have effectively become a normalized part of contemporary femininity. The above-mentioned conditions can be considered a kind of institutionalized madness, which accrues from the impossibility of femininity, unquote. This is McRobbie again. Winehouse, when alive, consistently rebelled against these expectations of femininity and the commodity status that come with it. The hologram production process replicates the surveillance that she was under, while eradicating the possibility of resistance against both the control of the music industry and the impossibilities of femininities. As such, the commodity's ability to talk back has been taken away from her. The digital embodiment of the hologram tour heightens the issue of commodification experienced by female artists in their earthly lives. The hologram tour, if it ever happens, would be another way of rewriting Winehouse's existence, like, for example, the biopic, reducing her to her use value and making her an endlessly profitable commodity, and rewriting her performances eradicates some of the edge and some of the resistance of her art, I would argue. Thank you for listening.